Get this time. And that's the mic, so it's fine.
Yeah, and you just need to get back to, just let it, after it, because you'll go for about 50 minutes, just give it a few seconds, 10, 15 to where it comes back to that graph with the volume.
And the Camtasia folder, the file gets up.
It's in the queue, so before...
It's in the queue.
Yeah, so before you disconnect the queue box, open the queue folder, because you want to take that
I'll
and
grab
put
the
it on.
AVR, I'll grab the AVR file, it's just a raw thing, and then I can MP4 it myself and all the rest of it. So.
And the most important thing is log me out.
And log you out. Very good.
Very kind of you, Sue. Thank you.
Indeed, that's very, very kind indeed. Thank
you.
you.
Before you start, it's 12:30 start, is it?
It's 12:30 start, so give them a few more minutes.
Yes. Tell me what I half know. You and I met on Sunnyside Farms.
Sunnyfields, Funny Farm,
Sunnyfields.
Sunnyfields in the UK is down in Southampton, so that would have been...
Oh, it would have been before 93, I tell you that.
Look, it would have been about 1991, something like that, So we were just kicking off, so look, it would have been 90.
And what do you do before that that was legal and you can tell me about? Did the VSCs?
So no, we did an HND Com Hort at Writtle.
Oh, I know, that's where Alan Gash comes from.
Yeah.
He's up there.
So HND Com Hort, commercial horticulture. Then we went farming here in NZ for 5-6 years.
That's the Royal We, is it?
That's the Royal We,
Oh, farming in NZ, with Tim or with others?
No, that was up in Hawke's Bay.
Oh, you told me that, yeah.
And then we came down here. Hi, yes, Murph.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi,
good to meet you.
Yeah.
Oh, you're the organiser?
Yeah. Well, more or less. Just responsible for the frontier. And
right, look, we're good. I'll just stand here and I haven't got any detailed stuff.
Someone offered him a point.
That's right. Yeah, look, we'll just go with the keyboard as well.
I'm interviewing.
He's just interviewing, so he knows what he's talking about.
Okay, so after Sunnyfields?
After Sunnyfields, over to here, that was up in veggies, organic veggies up in Hawke's Bay.
Oh yeah, was that?
That was
what he got farming NZ,
So
was farming NZ before Sunnyfields?
No, Sunnyfields was first. So HND, then Sunnyfields in the UK,
NZ,
then farming in NZ, and then back down to here. 95 down to Lincoln, and started back into academia. So we did postgrad dip, and then the masters.
Rest they say is history.
And the rest they say is history.
PG dip.
Yet to leave. PG dip, masters.
Oh, you did masters too?
Yeah, we did masters.
Oh yeah, that's the
you supervised that.
Yeah. I remember that well. Nice paper. We got nice paper.
It was that traumatic.
No, we got a good referred to. Jan was talking about this the other day. And then PhD on the old scheme reading.
Yep. And so and then the PhD. We got a glass of water. Is that my water? That's good. I'll claim that now.
Do you mean he's a troublemaker or he solved trouble when in Lucy? You were in Lucy, weren't you?
Yeah, I was in Lucy as well. I was president for a while.
You were?
Yeah.
I remember that.
We were there for the first VSM bill. Yeah.
So you fought the first VSM bill?
Yeah, we fought the first VSM bill. Second navigated that.
You think the inputs can wait?
Yeah, right. They don't move much. Yeah, there we are. And now, of course, you've initiated the...
And so we've got the Future Farming Centre is the current shindig, yeah.
You know your dear Christine, not just Christine?
Yeah.
Are you married or partners?
No, we're partners.
What I want to know is, does she call you Charles, like maybe your mother used to call you? Does she call you Murph?
No, she calls me Murph. Everybody calls me Murph, apart from Mother.
I knew. That's what I thought. Okay. That was exactly my prediction.
Very good. Right.
I hope your little daughter doesn't call you Murph when she's older.
It'll be interesting to see what goes on there, yeah.
Don't start yet.
Right, let's give him another couple of minutes.
Can't get the workers around here, can you? Right,
Shall we go
good
for it?
afternoon everybody, thanks very much for coming to this little, or big seminar. This is what I call the legendary Charles Murphy. And I was wondering who in his family and life actually calls him Charles, and he said only his mother. I didn't think anybody called him Charles. Anyway, I call him Murphy, and sometimes the legendary Murphy, or sometimes the legendary Murph, and occasionally rude words as well. It's a family audience, so I'll keep quiet about that. He's had such a long background, and I knew some of it. I've had to ask him again what he's been doing. I'll tell you the legal stuff. He did an HND, that's Higher National Diploma, in Agriculture in Britain, at Writtle Agricultural College, where Alan Gash used to work, didn't you, Alan? Did you teach him?
No.
Thank goodness.
So you're not to blame then?
No, you wouldn't be looking so mellow if you did. And then he worked at a farm on the south coast of England, an organic farm called Sunnyfields, outside Southampton. And I was on field work one day and went to visit Sunnyfields, and there was old Murphy. So the first time I met him was on a farm just outside Southampton in the south of England. And I still talk to him after all that. Then he came here to do farming. He worked on organic farms in Hawke's Bay, growing commercial vegetables, which is very good. Then, oh crikey, then he did a postgraduate diploma here, then he did a master's supervised by some twit, not unlike me, not a million miles from me. Then he did a PhD supervised by the same twit, but also someone sensible, like John Hampton. So John and I looked after Murph during his PhD, which was trying to find ways of managing weeds without herbicides, particular steam weeding.
Yep.
Some people use flame weeders. Murph was pioneering a steam weeder. He's multiple talented because he's great at some electronic things like PowerPoints and animations. He can also make things like tractors and steam weeders and mend things that I don't even understand how they work. So he's very widely talented, actually, in practical things as well as academic. You might now know that he's the initiator of the Future Farming Centre at Lincoln's Biological Husbandry Unit. Quite a pioneering advance for that unit, in my opinion. Also in his short life, he was president of the Lincoln University Students' Association, LUSA, when the first idea of voluntary student membership was raised by the then government, and LUSA and other unions are still fighting that. So, you know, if I had a bigger piece of paper, I could tell you a lot more, but that'll do. So there we are. So Murph is now going to take on, very bravely, I think. I'm supposed to do that.
Here's the mug.
Oh, I'm supposed to do that.
Oh, you're too late.
He's now going to take on very bravely this organic thing. And if you want to get people excited within Lincoln University or outside, if you want them to polarise with a capital P,
this is the topic to do it.
This is it. This is
Right.
what people get very excited about. Well, I won't go on, but you know very well. You're going to mention Callaghan in a minute.
Yeah, I am indeed, yes.
Some very famous scientists in this country, in my opinion, used to stick to their knitting and talk what they know about. But let's not get into that. Some people think it's absolute rubbish, and others think it's one component of feeding the world in the next 30 or 40 years. So you can form your own view, but with that Murph lead you down that path, one way or the other.
Right.
Thank you then, Murphy.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you, Steve, and thank you very much for the invitation to talk with you today about what is, I suspect, a fairly challenging topic. What I'm hoping to do is explain and give you a better understanding of what organic agriculture is all about, and then delve into this rather nutty problem of the relationship between science and organics. I seem to remember there was a long delay on this last time. That's always handy, isn't it?
Let's have the discussion now, shall we?
Here we have the discussion now. Right. An outline. Two main parts to the presentation. I want to give you an overview of the history of organics agriculture. It can only be an overview, and I'm going to pick out a few of the key scientists involved, and hopefully that will illuminate organic agriculture and explain it a bit better to you. I'm then going to attempt the impossible to square the circle and explain the relationship between, science and organic agriculture, and I'm also going to include a whole bunch of other alternative agricultures in there, because there are many different forms of alternative agriculture out there now. We're fortunate in organics now to have a very authoritative, academic, rigorous history written, going back to original sources by a chap called Philip Conford. And so if you really want to get into the murky depths of organics and its history, these are the two books you need to go and read. So when you're trying to explain organics, the problem is there is no simple answer. It's many things to many people. It is the proverbial broad and diverse church. I believe, however, at a fundamental there are two components to it. The first is a critique of industrial agriculture, and then finding an alternative. Now, myself and Conford devise up organic history into two main phases, which I label Organics version 1 and version 2 for simplicity and brevity. And that is from its foundations back in the 1920s through to about the 1950s. And this is the version of organics that's concerned with the effects of management on the health, the quality of soil, and the linkages between soil quality, health, and that of plants, animals, and therefore human beings. And Lady Eve Balfour's very famous quote within organics there. And then around the late 1950s into the 1960s, we had a revolution in organics, and globally, many revolutions effectively in organics and ecology set off by Silent Spring. And this is where the current focus of organic agriculture on the xenobiocides, the agrochemicals, the pesticides originated. There's also ecology in there, and I'm going to make a couple of snide comments about commercialization later on. So the context, what is the context of society in which this emergence of organic agriculture is happening? And this is primarily the Industrial Revolution. It's important to realise just how big a revolution it was at that time. And it's essentially the largest change in human civilization and society since the advent of agriculture and civilization itself. There are a lot of civilizations in the intervening time, but this was something unique and quite different. And this, of course, the Industrial Revolution is linked to the Enlightenment. So, what happened? Most people the labour force was moving out of the countryside and into the cities to power the industrial machinery, to work in factories. And this was creating industrial agriculture, and by this I mean at this stage not hooning great tractors running around the place. All of agriculture is still powered by muscle, animal and human, but it started to create the termination of the local nutrient cycles that had existed pre-industrial the revolution, and the transportation of food from the countryside into the cities, and then the loss of those nutrients through sewage systems or just straight into the rivers. This was resulting in widespread nutrient depletion of the soil. That resulted in poor quality food. If your soil is deficient in nutrients, it won't grow much food and it won't be of such high quality. And also, to get that food into towns without going off in an area before refrigeration and canning, the food invariably had to be processed. For example, refining flour to make white bread. White bread will last a lot longer than a wholemeal loaf. It's had a whole load of the nutrients taken out of it. So, to give you an idea of how far back this issue goes, I think you can't do much better than quoting Karl Marx. He's writing here in 1850 about this exact issue, removing nutrients from soils and being lost into the cities. Karl Marx here is writing some 20 years before Mendeleev puts together the periodic table. To give you a context here, the concept of the chemical elements really is still only at the chemical level, and it's not very well fleshed out. The atomic understanding of the chemical elements is a long way in the future here. This was a very well understood issue going back well before Karl Marx's time. He, of course, was a renowned soil scientist. He's a political economist. He is simply paraphrasing what he's heard from other people. So, going on to the first person who really can be viewed as a founding figure in organic agriculture, and that is Franklin King. And he's a professor of agricultural physics over in the USDA, and he also in the US, and he also worked in the USDA Bureau of Soils as its chief for a while. His seminal contribution to organic agriculture is Farmers of 40 Centuries. Farmers of 40 Centuries was essentially the result of a war King was having with a number of his colleagues. Say no. Just say no. So he was having a good old academic spat with a number of his colleagues, and the orthodoxy of the time, supported by the USDA, was that the nutrients in soil would last essentially indefinitely without replenishment. And perhaps as only a physicist could say, that's nuts, people. So he wrote Farmers of 40 Centuries, which is essentially an agricultural travelogue of his journeys through the Orient, looking at farming systems that had persisted for 4 millennia. King's position is now clearly the orthodoxy. Very few people think you can farm forever without putting some fertilisers on and not run into trouble. The next figure, and if there's one person that's held up as the founding father of organic agriculture, it is Albert Howard. He grew up in a mixed farm in the UK. He was in agriculture from the day he could walk. He was also no academic slouch. He had a good quality chemistry degree, so it's not like he's completely ignorant of what was going on in the mineral fertilizer world of the time. He spent his entire life working in agriculture, including amongst his many jobs, the Imperial Economic Botanist of the government of India, which I think would be the most glorious job ever. His seminal contributions, and again, all of these scientists wrote a whole swag of academic papers. You clearly don't get to be a professor if your publishing list isn't very long. His two contributions are the waste products of agriculture, and particularly an agricultural testament. If there's one book that's held up as the foundation of organic agriculture, it is an agricultural testament. And his argument was that Liebig's mineral theory of plant fertilizers was too simplistic. He said it wasn't the whole picture, it was too reductionist. It failed to take into account the importance of soil biology and the importance of cycling nutrients. And I'd suggest that his argument now is pretty much in full agreement with our modern understanding of soils and soil science. And the third science is Robert McCarrison. He was principally a medical doctor, a physician, although he was an exceptionally talented individual and had a very wide remit in the sciences. And he's actually the founder of a number of scientific disciplines within medicine, and one of the areas he founded was the effects of nutrition on the epidemiology of disease, essentially looking at what people were eating, the effect it had on their health. And he's famous within organics for his studies on the fighting men of India, particularly the Hunsas, who are considered to be an outstandingly fit and healthy tribe. And so two of his seminal books here, Studies in Deficiency Disease and Nutrition and Health. So he only died around the late 60s, so he's moving through in time there. And so these are just three figures of the people held up. These are kind of three heads and shoulders above the rest, but there's a whole swag of scientists and non-scientists involved in this great fermenting discussion that's creating organics. And so to sum up those discussions, what is the critique these people had of industrial agriculture? Well, they were showing for the first time that there was a strong link between what people ate and their health. And we're talking health here in a positive aspect, not just the absence of disease. And the germ theory of disease is really right in its heyday at this period of time. They said that the food people eating was there in industrial countries was making them ill. And the diet of the urban poor of those times was really pretty grim by modern standards. And this urbanization was also creating social problems. Social issues may seem a long way from organic agriculture, but these were fundamental at this time. As Howard went on, exactly Howard's critique here, Liebig's theory was too reductionist. Not that it was wrong, he had no quibbles. Plants clearly take up nutrients in mineral forms predominantly. We know a bit more today about that. But he said he hasn't got the whole story. It's only part of the story here. And he said, therefore, that the health and the quality of the soil and affects the food it produces, and therefore the health of the people who consume it. We have this causal chain developing. And so their conclusions were there is a direct link between what people eat and their health, and also the quality of the soil and the food it produces and people's health. And this is where the organic mantra of healthy soil, healthy crops, healthy people come from. On the social side of things, they also said we really got to get away from this linear country to town system. We've got to go back to locally based systems, and again things like transition towns now are a modern echo of much of this kind of thinking. And they pointed out that agriculture is fundamentally part of the natural world, part of ecology, and they've got to work with those natural systems against them, otherwise it's a bit like banging your head against the proverbial wall. So they said also we need to think of things about a holistic, at a system level, as in general systems theory. And they said we need to think about farms as though they were organisms. And this is the word from which organics is derived. Organic doesn't derive from organics as in organic chemistry. It derives from organism, and it is an indication that we need to think about farming in a system-type fashion, a general systems theory, systems analysis. And so the logical conclusion of all of that argument is that industrial agriculture is fundamentally flawed, i.e. modern terms we would say it's unsustainable. So that's a critique, that's all very well. We need to come up with some solutions. So the solutions the pioneers were promoting, they were saying plant nutrition, soil nutrition is more than just whacking on a few mineral fertilizers. We need to take soil biology into account, and for Howard at least, compost was the answer. They said Westerners have really got to get off this pretty foul diet they're eating, and they've got to go back to the kind of diets that they saw healthy cultures eating, and that means lots of fresh, minimally processed foods, mostly plants, plus small amounts of animal products. That's just the modern food pyramid writ large. And so right back at the beginning, organic food meant what we would now call a whole food and unprocessed, a generally healthy diet. It had nothing to do with being free of chemicals, pesticides. And if that is your critique and your solution, you're clearly not wanting to be some kind of high-value niche market selling to yuppies in cities. You're really talking about world domination. You're talking about replacing industrial agriculture with your alternative. And we can see the historical echoes of all of this coming through to today. If you look at those very early founding organic associations, none of them are called organic because they all predate the term organic farming. They all have the word soil, and most of them have the word health in their names, including the Soil and Health Association in New Zealand. There's IFOAM's Principle of Health, which was recently reformulated, he said, which is now about a decade ago, and their first principle makes this very clear link right back to these original concerns of the founders of organics. And this is exactly where the organic mantra comes from. Now, Organics version 1 has a lot of other really interesting stuff going on it, mostly which has been forgotten, certainly until Philip Comfort came along and wrote a history about it. There's some really outside stuff from the modern perspective. There were very clear religious links, particularly with Christianity. Many streams of organics had a very strong spiritual focus. There was social engineering going on that wasn't far short of eugenics, and there were capital P formal political associations. There was a large contingent of the organic movement that were part of the fascists with strong links to the Nazi party in Germany. We're talking about stuff that really is a complete anathema to modern organics. And when Comfort stood up and gave a talk about this once, he almost got lynched. So, what was not on the radar is the whole issue of agrochemicals, the xenobiocides, not until Organics version 2. So what happened to Organics version 1? We're at the end of the Second World War. There are a lot of hungry people around. Rationing is still in force. Industrial agriculture using artificial nitrogen fertilizer is ramping up production like you wouldn't believe. The organic movement is going on about esoteric arguments about the importance of soil biology and ecology, and using compost, they lost the argument. What then happened is a book that was published, Silent Spring. And this is widely held up by historians as the spark that elevated issues of ecology and sustainability up from the academic level up to that of the general public discourse. It also ignited Organics version 2 and effectively saved organics from oblivion. The key issue there is the xenobiocides, and to a lesser extent ecologies, and particularly the revolution that was happening in society in the 1960s fanned that flame and started things going again. The whole issue of soil and health became subsumed. It wasn't lost, but it became much less important. But all those other issues, exciting things about fascism and stuff, just got completely eliminated from the organic movement at that point. And so unlike the many threaded, complex arguments that the founders of organics were having, for the revolutionaries they were a bit of a one-issue party, and it was all about the magic bullets, the xenobiocides morphing into unpredictable ecological toxins, and of course the poster boy of that is DDT. And a lovely couple of pictures there from that era. And so, simple problem, simple solution. Agriculture has survived for 10,000 years without these things, so we can just jolly well continue without them as well. We're just going to ban the whole lot. That was the very simple solution. And at the same time, we're in the middle of the 1960s. This is a period of very significant revolution, and going into the beginning of the 70s as well. So there is a big ferment going on. And so this is a key part of what's going on here. And recently, just to give an idea of the relationship between this, is the founding, the last director of the Soil Association in the UK, Patrick Holden, started his farming career on a commune in Wales. We're not just talking about hippies in a cynical sense, we are talking about hippies as a genuine original social movement. And the irony I find about this is essentially about a bunch of anti-establishment revolutionary hippies that were interested in organics were also interested in how they could commercialise it and make a whole load of money out of this. That was a complete anathema to their elders, many of whom said that was really not jolly sporting at all. So, where has that left us? What is organics today? Well, it really is now a very, very diverse system. We've got everything from small farmers owning their own land, ecologically diverse integrated systems, a whole range of crops, and they are part and parcel of their local system. For example, CSA, community supported agriculture. All the way through to organic systems that essentially mimic the industrial agricultural paradigm. Large-scale farms producing a handful of products, next to no integration with the agronomic and the other physical systems underpinning agriculture, flogging stuff into anonymous commodity markets. It's all about the dollar stuff. And there is, of course, everything in between. This means organics is somewhat rather schizophrenic nowadays. And this is a classic example from within the organic movement. This chap called Craig Sams, an organic entrepreneur from the UK, stood up one day and said, when Mars bars go organic, we know we've won the battle. But to some extent, that is the logical endpoint of the purest anti-pesticide thread within organics. If your whole focus in organics is just making food without pesticides in it, and that's the end of your remit, well, an organic Mars bar makes perfect sense. Another large contingent of the organic movement spat the dummy, big time. For them, a Mars bar, organic or not, is essentially the antithesis of organic agriculture. The success of organic agriculture would be the complete elimination of Mars bars and everything else similar, i.e. all the highly processed, refined, sugary, fatty foods. Their argument is the logical endpoint of that soil, plant, human health organics version 1. We have a bit of a milieu going on there. And I think there's a couple of useful points to make here about what organic agriculture is fundamentally not. It's not party political anymore, although of course there is a very clear alignment with the Green parties. It is, however, insanely, small p, political. If you're a social movement wanting to change the way agriculture is done, I can't think of anything any more political than that at all. Fundamentally, agriculture is not about lifestyle choices, but for many people, it's inseparable at a personal level. To use a couple of cliches, and certainly going back into the 60s, 70s, and 80s, if you were an organic practitioner at that stage, there was quite a large probability that you were the proverbial sandal-wearing hippie. You don't fundamentally have to be the archetypal sandal-wearing hippie to be an organic practitioner. You can wear a suit and be into organics, to use the other cliche. In those early days, the probability of those two overlapping were very large. Today it is considerably less. We have a very large number of people that aren't into alternative lifestyles and other of those kinds of issues who are interested in organics. There is still quite a significant overlap, but they are not mutually inclusive. On that same kind of vein, the schizophrenia continues. For organics version 1, marketing, the idea of selling into high-value niche markets, isn't what organics is about. For industrial organics, it's almost the raison d'etre for the thing. It's in there, it's interested in this commercialization, in making money out of organics. Having a premium product you can get a big return for is really quite important. So returning to the thread, picking up again the thread of the relationship of science and organic agriculture. Right from the founding fathers all the way through, scientists have continued to be involved, actively involved in the first and second phases of organic agriculture. And like the first phase, the revolution in organic agriculture was created by a scientist, Rachel Carson, who wrote Silent Spring. Again, she grew up in a family farm, she seeped in agriculture from childhood, and again, no slouch academically, she was doing very well until unfortunately family pressures meant she couldn't continue her studies up to her doctorate level. But she continued in research, her field of zoology, particularly marine zoology, even though she didn't continue on to doctorate studies, and she was also a very good popularizer of science. She was a very good writer. A handful of other examples of the relationship. Mother Earth is the magazine of the Soil Association, so this is a popular going out to the general public, and this regularly published research papers until around the 80s, and a research paper as we as scientists would understand methods, results, discussion stuff. The Soil Association also instigated the Hawley experiment, which was the first long-term field trial comparing different farming systems. Lots of other long-term farm trials, but not really looking at the system level. And there was a whole bunch of scientists, both agricultural and medicinal, advising and running that experiment. And if you really want to go into lots of details, Comford's got a whole chapter in his second book detailing the many scientists involved in organic agriculture over the years. And as the final capstone, as the relationship, we have now an international society dedicated to research in organic agriculture. We've currently got a board with 6 profs on it and 4 PhDs, and the original board of 12 had 10 professors on it. Clearly we're not kind of slouching around in the qualifications here, and there's 600 odd members, which I think isn't too bad for a niche agricultural science society. So, organic agriculture originated because of scientific arguments and debates. They weren't actually trying to create organic agriculture at the time. That wasn't on their mind. They were having internal academic debates. Why, therefore, are we in the situation, including some very highly qualified scientists, consider organic and some other alternative agricultures to be unscientific? So we're going to move on to point 2, part 2 at this point, and I'm going to attempt the impossible and square the circle. Now, unfortunately, I've yet to find one of the protagonists in this debate actually concisely say exactly why they think organics is unscientific. But I hope I've created here a succinct, the core of their argument, and it's essentially that modern farming, industrial agriculture was created by scientific research, by science. Organic farming, to some extent, is the antithesis of modern farming. Therefore, organic farming is unscientific. And bless him, Sir Paul Callaghan recently stuck his head clean above the parapet and said that organic farming is unscientific. So at least I know I don't have a straw man argument up here. So how are we going to square this circle? Well, this is a really insanely huge and difficult topic, and it goes right to the heart of the philosophy of science, what it is and what it isn't. And as this is not an entire book, this is an afternoon's presentation, I'm only going to be able to really pick the eyes out of this. So I'm going to start by having a look at what the charge of being unscientific is. And the dictionaries actually have proved completely useless in this respect. So I've created this 4 tiers, this hierarchy of what I think when somebody says something is unscientific, what it can potentially mean. The first level, the simplest level, is when you do some lousy experimental design. Somebody else rejects your paper and says it's not good science. The next level up is when somebody makes a claim about something, about the natural world. For example, this chemical will kill aphids, but they've just got not a shred of data to back up their claim. The claim may be a perfectly good hypothesis, no experimental proof, that's not scientific either. Then you move up into the more heavyweight territory, if you like. Somebody makes a claim, for example, organic agriculture does not need fertilizers, and there is a very large, substantial body of empirical evidence, data, that says that's just plain wrong, pal. And then at the final level, you really run into the proverbial brick wall. A claim is made that is contrary to a very well-established scientific theory, scientific law, and to give the ultimate, if you think you've got a perpetual motion machine, the lads in the white coats will turn up soon because you're trying to break the second law of thermodynamics, and you cannot do that. The problem with all those is they simply define unscientific as the opposite of science. We're just in a kind of a bit of tautological circle here. So to solve this problem, we really understand what is science. And most of the people here are scientists. We do science every day. Intuitively, we know exactly what science is all about. When you actually try and get down and make a really hard, precise definition, create an algorithmic decision process, if you like, the sand starts to run between your fingers. It's also not a settled debate either. You might think old Kuhn and Popper here had finished their argument some time ago, but they've got their followers are still litigating the very issues they were debating. And a couple of years ago, Massimo Pigalucci, I hope I have that pronunciation right, wrote what I thought was a really lovely book on this whole issue and called it Nonsense on Stilts. I'm going to borrow rather heavily off Massimo here, as he's a professor of philosophy and I'm not. So, science from non-science. The whole of Massimo's book is essentially what Popper called the demarcation problem. How do we tell science from non-science, pseudoscience, and good old-fashioned Fruit Loopery? Massimo's conclusion is that science is an investigation of nature based on the construction of empirically verifiable theories. So there are three legs, three tests. One is naturalism. Is this part of the natural world? So that essentially says science has no real business trying to verify things like spirituality and whether God exists or not. It has to have a solid theory. Is there a logically coherent theory that explains how reality works? If you've got those two things, you have philosophy. The thing that separates philosophy from science, and science effectively from every other human knowledge system, is empiricism. I.e., you've got a beautiful theory, have you got the data to support it? And that doesn't just mean experiment. There's historical sciences, evolution, geology, cosmology. You can't do experiments. It would be nice to run the Big Bang in a replicated randomized trial in the lab. Not possible. Disappointingly, we have to look, but there is data out there. Those are the three tests. So let's have a look at a few sciences when we're trying to say, okay, is this a science or is this not? Now, taking the usual pot shot, social science, or throwing political science here, there's a lot of people over the years that have said this stuff's not really science, get a grip on yourself, and there's still a few academics around that would consider social science to be an oxymoron. It passes Pagliacci's three tests with flying colours. They are clearly all science by that definition. However, let's take a couple of really good sciences, particularly string theory. This is physicist stuff. This is Paul Callahan's territory. And this is the big boys playing around with lots of maths and stuff. And there's SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And you might not think it's a great idea and it might be a bit of a waste of money, but is it science? Well, they're all pointing big radio telescopes up into the sky and they've got computers crunching stuff. It all looks pretty sciencey. The problem is these actually fail this test. String theory is untestable by any conceivable thing. It fails the test of empiricism. So in theory, it's a pseudoscience. SETI fails as it cannot be rejected because its theory states that the chances of hearing the message from the proverbial little green men is really, really, really small. So we're going to spend decades, centuries listening, and if we don't find anything, well, it doesn't actually prove there are no little men out there. It fails the empiricism test. That gives an indication when you say something is scientific or unscientific, you have to be really careful. Your simple intuitive understanding may not necessarily be quite up to the job. That's why we need these detailed thinking processes. What's a few bits of real pseudoscience? Well, we've got a good old standard kind of list there. They all fail the tests, or one or more of the tests, and they all fail them with flying colours. Now, another issue we have in science, say your science is considered to be a good real science, it passes those three tests, but then you start getting down into the devil of the details. And ironically, from certainly my perspective, the irony of science is it's just about the only human knowledge system that says the level of knowledge it have is not certain, it's only proximate. So contrary that to religious belief systems that often consider themselves to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The irony is though science recognises knowledge is never certain, it has the most certain knowledge humanity has ever produced. However, you don't get a Nobel Prize for finding exactly the same as everybody else who went before you. You get a Nobel Prize for being the first person to show that everybody else was actually wrong. However, the converse doesn't actually apply. Just because you've got a lovely pet hypothesis that's contrary to the mainstream doesn't mean you should start booking your flight to Sweden anytime soon. As Carl Sagan beautifully pointed out, just because some geniuses were laughed at does not imply all who were laughed at are geniuses. Everybody laughs at Bozo the Clown. So, scientists are humans and humans are not immune to dogma, therefore scientists can be dogmatic. As Carl Sagan again pointed out, it's important to keep an open mind, but not so open that your brains fall out. We need to be sceptical of new, novel theories. Odds on, they are probably wrong, but we mustn't guard our old cherished theories with such vengeance that we start biting people. So, I'm going to need one more piece of philosophy that's not directly related to the philosophy of science to complete what I think is enough arguments to start attacking the problem of whether organic agriculture is scientific or not. And that relates to the topic of this book by Robert M. Pirsig, which somewhat unusually doesn't actually have anything to do with motorcycle maintenance or Zen Buddhism. It, as the subtitle says, it is an inquiry into values, as opposed to his later book, Ilia, which was an inquiry into morals. We are now in the realm of ethics and moral philosophy, the area of values. Now, philosophy can be described as the womb of science. It's where ideas gestate until the torch of empiricism ignites and we can start doing some real science. And this area of ethics and moral philosophy is starting to move into the science through an area called value theory that is using things such as psychology and sociology and experimental economics, and I couldn't resist a dig at neoclassical economics failing the empiricism test. I hope there's no economic people here. But we need to be careful. When we say science is moving into the area of ethics and morals, we've got to be very clear about which part it can gain traction on and which it can't. Human beings are the products of evolutionary processes. Fundamentally, Darwin's law applies here. We can understand why human beings have ethical and moral values, why we are ethical creatures, and we can investigate why we end up with the particular morals we do. But science can never say which of those morals is right or wrong. These things, values, are fundamentally outside the remit of science. To put it simply, you cannot design an experiment to prove whether something is good or bad. You can design experiments that will show something is real or not, but the scientific method is forever mute on questions of value, whether something is right or wrong, good or bad. So, let's go back to what I consider is the core of the charge against organic farming, that it is unscientific. What is the problem with this? This has a good old-fashioned philosophical logical fallacy right in its guts. If we make a quick substitution, we can see where the problem lies. Atomic weapons are the product of science, therefore opposing nuclear weapons is unscientific. This is clearly not a scientific argument. This is an ethical argument. This is one of values. This is what I believe lies at the heart of this misunderstanding that organic agriculture is not scientific. So we can view farming on a continuum between the anthropocentric and the biocentric value systems. Anthropocentric, nature is only of value to human beings when they can get something out of it. The biocentric end, nature has a value all of its own, independent of humanity. And we can put different farming systems along this continuum, and we can argue about the details, but clearly industrial agriculture is up at the anthropocentric end. I think most current mainstream farmers are often concerned about a whole bunch of other things apart from just their own interests. And then you head down to the alternative agricultures, organics, agroecology and permaculture, etc., down this other end. I think this argument that organic agriculture is unscientific is an example of what is called scientism. And that is essentially a belief that when something is developed by the scientific method, not only is it a real thing, that it is also therefore somehow good. It attains a value off the back of the scientific method, which is not implied by the scientific method. To put it round the other way, there is a charge that if people do not use the products of science, they are somehow being unscientific or Luddites, to use the other terminology. That is not correct, I think. That is another logical fallacy. What we have is that organic and the other alternative agricultures have different values, to put it in businessy terminology, aims and objectives than industrial agriculture. They therefore decide to use or not to use the products of science and scientific knowledge in different ways. Industrial agriculture aims to maximise yields and or profits. Organic agriculture wants to achieve ecological and social sustainability. Both can use science to achieve their aims, but that science may tell those two different systems to do completely contrary things. For example, it may tell industrial agriculture to put more nitrogen on because that will boost yields. It would then tell organic agriculture to put less nitrogen on because that nitrogen is causing environmental pollution. The science is telling those two different systems to do completely opposite things because of the different value systems, not because one is scientific and the other is unscientific. So, we'll run quickly through my list of ways in which the term unscientific can be used. So, in relation to the question, is organic agriculture unscientific? and organic agricultural science unscientific as well. It's kind of a bit difficult to separate them here when we're talking about what is unscientific or not. Can we do good, valid agricultural science that is methodologically correct? I think no problems at all. We do very similar science to mainstream science. Is it supported by data? There's lots of good papers into organic agriculture. The results and the conclusions are supported by the conclusions are supported by the data, by the results. Have we got big swathes of data backing this stuff up? Yes. Does putting compost onto soil improve soil quality and crop growth? In most instances, yes. Soil's a complicated system, your mileage varies a bit, but consistently we've got large data sets that say yes. Is it inconsistent with theory and models? Well, I know of no theories of physics, chemistry, biology, ecology that are violated by organic agriculture. You know, we're not into breaking the second law here. So, I think on a very quick spin through there, can we say that organic agriculture is scientific? I think yes. There's certainly no indication that it's unscientific. So, is it going to pass Massimo's 3 tests? Is organic agriculture part of the natural world? Yes. Is it got some good theories behind it? Yes. We continue the compost example. We know why adding compost is going to increase crop yields in most cases, and we can also explain in which cases it won't increase crop yield. We've got plenty of good theories. And is it empirically testable, verifiable? Yes, we've got swags of data out there. So I think on this analysis as well, organic agriculture can be said to be scientific. So, everything's smelling beautiful in the state of Denmark. I don't think so. Right, what is going on here, and why do these people actually believe that organic agriculture is scientific when there's a swag of scientists involved in it and very good philosophical reasons to say no, it is? Well, organics is fundamentally a system of agriculture. It is not fundamentally a lifestyle or an alternative social system or a spirituality or a secular religion. However, for many people involved in organic agriculture, it is exactly those things. Let's pick a bit of this apart. What do I mean by a secular religion? Well, a religion is effectively a collection of cultural systems, belief, worldviews that relate humanity to spirituality. For some, organics has effectively become a secular religion, i.e. a religion without a god. It is, for them, a way of lifestyle. People talk about organic lifestyles, and it is a key part of their spirituality. And even if these people don't actually themselves understand this situation or articulate it, in New Zealand, the Soil and Health Association, our major national organic association, produces a magazine called Organic NZ. There is actually very little organic agriculture in it at all. It is almost exclusively alternative lifestyle issues. However, this is not a problem that's particularly unique to organic agriculture. Loads of other scientific disciplines and non-religious things attract this kind of attention. Even science itself. Science is fundamentally the antithesis of religion. It rejects the appeal to authority on which most religions are based. Scientology, however, is a religion that's trying to gain a lot of its mana through its linguistic association with science and its foundations in medical pseudoscience. It is a religion trying to pretend it is a science. So, I believe just as science can't be held responsible for Scientology, pseudoscience and all the rest of the fruit loopery that goes on out there, nor can the scientific side of organic agriculture be held responsible for those who consider organic agriculture to be something more than a simple agricultural system. So, yet another schism. We've got lots of them. So, organic agriculture and some of the other alternatives contain both scientific and non-scientific sides, often as a rather impenetrable mixture. This, I think it's fair to say, can give the impression for those looking at things from the outside, particularly if they haven't looked at things in depth, can cause them to believe that the whole thing is unscientific or of a religious or other nature. This is not the case. This is clearly a case of speaking before you understand the facts. However, there are problems within organics and relating to this whole issue of this mixture between the scientific and the lifestyle sides. So I'm going to go and pick on a few of them, and the one I've already mentioned, organic agriculture does not need fertilizers. There's a fairly heavy dollop of irony in this as well, because King in Farmers of 40 Centuries argued exactly the opposite. So how did organic agriculture end up in this position? This can be traced back to Lady Eve Balfour, who founded the Soil Association in the UK, and also which set up the Hawley experiment, And she had the suggestion that it was possible for low intensity, low output farming systems, for example, hill country sheep that didn't export much nutrients, so some meat, some lambs and a bit of wool, that the nutrients released by petogenesis would outstrip the rate of nutrient removal. So therefore you could continue that system indefinitely without putting fertilizers on. This is back in the 1930s, and that actually wasn't a bad hypothesis at the time. You know, we are predating plate tectonics here. So they said, let's do the science, let's get the data in, Hawley experiment. They ran this thing, unfortunately terminated after 6 years, which is almost the exact point when this kind of system starts to unwind. And there were two sides in this debate, scientists on both sides, and they all rushed in and claimed victory, which was of course completely erroneous because the data didn't support one side or the other. But what has happened in the intervening 3/4 of a century is those sections of the organic movement that have essentially descended from the UK Soil Association, this, what was originally not a bad hypothesis that simply needed testing by experimentation, has morphed into this widespread belief that organic agriculture does not need fertilizers, full stop. A nice little hypothesis has morphed into another dogma. I had a job in Ireland for 2 years, and my job was to kill this thing. It was quite a tough fight. Compost. Much is made of compost in organic systems. Some people believe you cannot be organic if you are not applying compost and making this stuff. This goes all the way back to King in Farmers of 40 Centuries, and for Howard it really was a fundamental part of his alternative to Liebig's NPK thesis. What do we know about compost today? Is it beneficial for soil? Virtually universally yes, with a few minor exceptions. Has it become, its importance become overstated in organic agriculture? Certainly for some people, yes. Some people believe the solution to every agricultural problem is compost. I'm surprised they don't put it on their muesli. So, have alternative ways of improving soil health been overlooked? For example, cover cropping, surface residue management, such as practiced in no-till? I think yes. So, we're going to be out of here in 5 minutes. I'm very close to the end. So, yet more dogma. So, final example here, soil food web. Organics and especially the newly emerging biological farmers are really interested in soil ecology. Soil ecology is a real science. The soil food web as well. Variations in its functioning can affect crops, mycorrhizal associations being the textbook example. And we have scientists formally trained all the way up to PhD in soil ecology offering soil ecology food web analysis services. You send them a sample of soil, they do some analysis on it, and then they make recommendations on how you can improve your soil ecology and hence your stock and crop performance. Just the same as you do a nutrient analysis, send it to the lab and you get a fertilizer recommendation back. Is this scientific? Tricky. Is this an example of a Nobel Prize in waiting, or at some part in those past two slides, did the science turn into pseudoscience or even worse? And I think this is a fundamental issue in agriculture. This is a really big, broad and deep discipline. Even for us trained scientists, even that have specialities in some of these areas, trying to work out where the science stopped and the Fruit Loop began can be really quite hard. You know, we run into that whole issue, is this really the next big thing or is this madness? And for farmers who have really got to be the jacks of all trade, they have a real problem trying to decide one from the other. So I think it's not surprising farmers hit up the garden path on once a while. What does surprise me, however, is how many agricultural scientists tackle such of these problems as though we're dealing with old-fashioned Cartesian beings, rather than, if you'll excuse the other unscientific metaphor, of a bunch of over-evolved monkeys produced by the blind, pitiless and different forces of evolution. I think we really need to be looking at these problems much through a scientific lens rather than a political one, rather than making moral judgments about these farmers and the mistakes they've made, which are probably perfectly genuine considering their level of understanding. We need to actually look at these issues through the lenses of psychology, social science, etc. and say, okay, why have these people arrived at this decision? Judge them less and try and help them some more. So, to conclude, in one slide, is organic agriculture unscientific? Well, it depends. If you just mean organic agriculture as a system of agriculture based on values of ecological sustainability that uses science to achieve those values, clearly no, organics is scientific. If you're talking about it in terms of a secular religion or lifestyle, that's outside the remit of science. That's not natural, that's supernatural. However, there are a bunch of these dogmas out there that probably started off as reasonable ideas and have morphed into something much more. Are those unscientific? I think we can say that yes, they are. There is unfortunately no simple answer to this question. I hope that has somewhat demystified the problem for you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Matt. We said at the beginning that it's a major challenge for Murph to take this on. I think it's very brave of him. I thought that was full of deep thinking and deep scholarship. I don't know about you. I mean, you covered the world, really, Murph. It took quite a long time to do it, mind you.
Yeah, sorry.
So probably some undergrads are going to barge in a minute. Can anybody... Juan, can you see anybody outside that door at the moment? Just so we know how we're getting on. Not at the moment. Okay, so we'll
Got
take
a few more minutes.
I mean, it's almost done. It's almost done. The orthodox thing at this stage is say, anybody got any questions? Well, crikey, he's asked about 25 questions himself, hasn't he? Ravi, however, is this going to be a scientific question? Ravi?
Well, you gave a very good description of the historical background.
Yep.
And you tried to justify that it's scientific, but you didn't really explain what is organic agriculture, because I didn't get that from your lecture. Well, what is organic agriculture?
Excuse me to interrupt you. He said there were two contrasting views of the definition.
Yeah, look, it's difficult.
What do you believe?
Yeah, look. From my perspective, I'm just interested because it's a technical agricultural system. I like it because there's lots of fun science to be gone and done out there. Lots of things to be investigated. So it is fundamentally an agricultural system that aims to be sustainable in ecological, environmental, economic terms. We do. I mean, I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head. We have a number of relatively concise descriptions, but that's its core. It is those values. Then you try and stick on, how exactly that's done, and that's always the problem with values. Trying to turn a few simple principles into what is a very complex system that is agriculture. So it's kind of almost the subject for an entire lecture by itself. But look, it varies. It is different things to different people. Does that kind of answer your question?
Does spiritualism come in this?
Sorry, the spirituality, no. As far as I'm concerned, it's a technical. Is it physics, chemistry, biology, or ecology, or psychology? If it's not that, I'm gone.
It comes into the debate.
It comes into the debate.
It may not come into his personal view.
Yeah. So yeah, look, for some people, organics is a spiritual system.
Anyway, Ryan had a question, didn't you?
So, thanks for the point. And the criticism I hear is not so much that organic agriculture is unscientific, but that it doesn't feed the world and therefore doesn't really do anything useful.
Okay.
Good point.
So another seminar. Yes, it depends. If you're comparing it with high input agriculture using lots of nitrogen fertilizers and water, very few other agricultural systems can compete with that. The question is, how long can that go on? We of course know about the problems artificial nitrogen is causing, from everything from its production through to its causing the nitrogen cascade throughout the environment. Also, water is the next main component of industrial agriculture. We have severe problems with water misuse, use of fossil water and all the rest of it. How long can industrial agriculture continue along the current paradigm before it falls off its own cliff? We're mining fossil phosphorus to power that whole system as well. We need to close the nutrient cycles. So in the short time scale, can you produce more food through industrial agriculture in the West? Yes. In developing countries, no. Using ecological techniques can often increase yield above what is done by industrial agriculture. The other fundamental problem is if you increase yield, you will increase population. Ecology 101, populations increase to the limit of their food supply. Malthus was still fundamentally correct. It just takes time if you're a bigger species than a smaller one. Industrial agriculture has been pointed out through the use of artificial nitrogen is probably responsible for half the world's population. 3 billion people exist because of Haber-Bosch nitrogen. Increasing agricultural production doesn't actually always just feed the world, it increases the world's population. You end up chasing your tail. It's not a solution to anything. How's that for being how's that a provocative
That's a
statement?
bit political, that one. And Mike's got a question.
I did really enjoy some of the things about your speech, by the way, or your talk. And I particularly like the fact that you put into it the motivation behind these things. The motivation for industrial agriculture being basically economics.
Yep.
The motivation behind organic agriculture, whether you call it lifestyle, you could put in a whole lot of other motivations there, perhaps. Now and I'm going to argue against the side that I normally support. One of the things that always annoys me about organic agriculture is the dogmas. But let's not forget there are plenty of dogmas on the industrial agriculture side, and we almost got one there, but only industrial agriculture can feed the world.
Yeah, look, it's thank you, Mike. It's a very good point. Look, at times it's been a dirty fight, and it hasn't been necessarily a good humoured fight at times, and there are arguments on both sides, like you say, that aren't really good arguments. There's dogmas, there's science masquerading as values, and probably vice versa as well. It really is a big, ugly mixture, and trying to tease that all apart, and from my perspective, I've spent a lot of time as a scientist working in organics going, why do these other people take this position that what I'm doing is unscientific? So this is really part of my thought processes over the years to say, how do we untangle this mess? As an academic, bringing those thought processes to this problem, there is clearly a conundrum in here. How do we pull this apart and understand things? And I hope that is what I've done here.
I agree. It's just worth saying that in the UK, most of the methane going into the air is from waste food in landfills, usually takeaway food from a cheap restaurant thrown away inside its plastic container and buried in the ground. So we do eat the wrong stuff, as Murph said, and we don't have waste a lot.
Yeah,
so feeding 9 billion is a massive challenge. The very famous Indian scientist who's getting on a bit now, called W.M. Swaminathan, I think his name is. You know his name, don't you? He's a star, really. He's just writing a preface for a book we've just finished. And he calls it the evergreen revolution is needed. Of course we have to feed people around the world, but not throwing away so much junk food that it's generating more methane than agriculture. I mean, that can't be right. So I've got a lot of respect for Swaminathan, and it's good of him to write a prologue for the book we've got coming up. Now listen, one, if there's nobody outside, John, we'll give you one, and then we have to stop, right?
Thank you very much, I appreciate the sentiment. The future farming centre, what have you got planned to try and drive the validation of your thesis?
Lots of practical agricultural science. It's just that simple. And also, I'm very keen, having been involved in farming at the coalface myself, I realise we have that huge chasm between agricultural science outputs and getting that stuff over to farmers. The good old extension services that I know more, they weren't necessarily as good as hindsight tends to make them out, and rosy views and stuff. But we clearly have a problem. Scientists are just, farmers are just not being delivered the information from science in a form they can digest. So I see a key thing, actually trying to pull these threads together, do this kind of thing for farmers, and so try and break down some of that hostility that has clearly existed over the years between organics, other alternative agriculture, and mainstream farming, and say, what's going on here? There's nothing muck and magic about organics. It's just got a different set of objectives.
It's worth saying that farmers are getting advice every day, but it's not from an advisory service, it's from pesticide and fertilizer companies, which I'm not knocking particularly.
And the pseudoscientists and the Fruit Loop department as well.
So farmers are getting advice every day, but unfortunately it's usually got a lot of baggage attached to it.
The whole biological fertilizer industry at the moment is a seething nest of pseudoscience, snake oil salesmen, and Fruit Loopery. It's really bad. And how does the average farmer manage to sort out the real stuff from the bad stuff? I've just got no idea. They just have no show of doing that. So we need people that are going to stand up and really try and sort the proverbial wheat from the chaff. But it's difficult when you're facing off another scientist who's probably more qualified in the area you're talking about, and you're saying you're talking Fruit Loopery, pal. Or are they on the way to their next? Are they the next Nobel recipient? There's plenty of scientists that have put their foot in their gobs on that.
Future Life of the Future Farming Centre and other organisations like it may manage that, but we are in a vacuum because the British government's got rid of a thing called ADAS, which some of you may know, ADAS, so we don't have advisory services anymore. So dogma is being given to those farmers, not necessarily organic dogma, but quite a few others. So we're a bit trapped, aren't we? Anyway, this is absolutely great. And I'll say what I said at the beginning, Murph. I mean it. That's full of deep thinking, if I may say, and deep scholarship too. And I congratulate you on that. So let's just thank him one more time, and then we'll.